The sound of Marcus Denton's pen clicking cut through the boardroom silence, each snap a reminder of my supposed irrelevance. My title, my authority, erased in a single dismissive phrase: compliance clutter. The room froze, eyes darted, and I sat still, humiliated, but not broken. They thought they'd silenced me. What Marcus didn't realize was that Crestfield Advisory Group's $22 million audit contract was held together by a single key: mine. One revoked signature, one overlooked clause, and the entire foundation could fracture. Before I continue, tell me, have you ever been silenced at work? Drop a yes in the comments and hit subscribe. Marcus Denton leaned forward in the boardroom, his voice smooth, but sharp enough to cut skin. "We don't need dead-weight compliance slowing down client delivery," he said, looking straight at me. The words landed like a slap, louder than any gavel. I felt my stomach twist, but I kept my face neutral as every eye in that room turned toward me. Not one person spoke up. The silence was worse than his insult. My signature authority, the backbone of Crestfield Advisory Group's $22 million audit contract, was revoked on the spot. He announced it with a smile, like he was doing the company a favor. I sat frozen, my pulse pounding in my ears. HR shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, the CFO pretended to study a document, and the CEO gave Marcus a curt nod of approval. No one objected. My years of precision, my oversight, my guarantee of compliance dismissed with a phrase and a flourish of arrogance. I wanted to stand, to scream, but I knew better. Rage in a boardroom only feeds their narrative. Instead, I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek, keeping my composure as Marcus smirked like a magician who thought he'd just made me vanish. They believed they had erased me, that compliance could be cut out like clutter from a budget line. What Marcus didn't understand was that his careless insult had triggered a crack in the foundation, and even the smallest fracture can bring down an empire. After Marcus Denton's smug declaration that I was dead-weight compliance, I didn't storm out or fight back. I walked out of that boardroom with my dignity intact and my silence sharper than any rebuttal. Anger fades quickly in corporate politics. Evidence does not. The moment my office door closed, I opened my laptop and began to collect the pieces of truth that Marcus had so carelessly ignored. I started with the HR trail. Every memo about realignment, every policy note about shifting responsibilities, every sanitized message that disguised humiliation in professional language. All of it I exported into an encrypted folder marked with precise timestamps. Then I moved to the contract itself, the $22 million agreement our Fortune 500 client had signed with Crestfield Advisory Group. Section by section, I annotated every clause tied to compliance authority. Highlighted in yellow was the dual authorization rule that Marcus had failed to even acknowledge, a single sentence binding certification to my role unless reassigned with board-level approval. That approval never existed. From there, I dug into audit chains, approvals that had bypassed me, reconciliations signed off without my review, vendor disclosures forwarded without attachments. Each flaw was more than sloppiness. It was liability. I saved Slack threads where I flagged concerns and was met with silence. Emails where I asked for clarity and was brushed aside. Meeting notes where my recommendations were dismissed as bureaucratic noise. The more I gathered, the clearer the picture became. Marcus thought he had stripped me of relevance, but what he had really done was cut the safety net out from under the entire company. While executives congratulated themselves on efficiency, I was building a map of their negligence, each document another thread in a web they could never untangle. I wasn't hoarding out of spite. I was preparing for the inevitable. Systems don't forget, and contracts don't bend to charm. 6 days stood between Marcus's illusion of control and the reality waiting to be revealed. I leaned back, let the glow of the screen wash over me, and allowed myself the faintest thought. They believed I was silent, but silence is never absence. It is preparation. And I was prepared for the moment when every ignored warning would return in the only language corporate arrogance understands: receipts. The countdown began long before the auditors walked through Crestfield Advisory Group's glass doors, and I could see it in every frantic email Marcus Denton sent. He was rehearsing for a performance, not preparing for compliance, flooding inboxes with charts and slogans about lean governance and streamlined oversight. The tone was smug, the kind that painted risk as inefficiency, like safety itself was an obstacle. I read each message with the detached calm of someone who already knew how the story would end. The Fortune 500 audit contract wasn't theater. It was law, and Marcus had gutted its backbone without understanding the cost. On Monday morning, the boardroom hummed with forced optimism. Marcus strutted at the head of the table, slides glowing behind him, each graph smoothed and sanitized until it gleamed like glass but hid the cracks beneath. "We've trimmed 30% of redundant checkpoints," he announced, voice full of practiced confidence. I sat quietly at the end of the table, labeled as an observer, stripped of the authority I had once wielded. The word itself felt ironic. Observer. As if they had sidelined me to watch passively while Marcus played conductor of a symphony he didn't understand. My screen told a different story. I still had read-only access to the audit portal, and I used it like a magnifying glass. Reconciliations had been patched with temporary numbers, approvals rubber-stamped by analysts too junior to question Marcus's orders, vendor disclosures with missing attachments flagged green by automation scripts that couldn't validate authenticity. It was the digital equivalent of painting over mold with white gloss. Marcus spoke about efficiency while I watched rot expand in real time. He gestured at the CFO for affirmation, and she nodded dutifully, though her eyes betrayed unease. The CEO chimed in about investor confidence, par-roading Marcus's lines about agility. Around the table, department heads murmured agreement, all too wary of being the one to dissent. Their silence was a currency Marcus spent freely. I leaned closer to my screen, zooming into a flagged discrepancy that no one else even noticed. The system had logged a missing authorization key for vendor compliance, the kind of minor flaw that could cascade when tested under audit. Marcus skipped over it with a flick of his wrist, moving to a slide about projected savings. He thought numbers on a slide outweighed signatures on a contract. I kept my face still, my breathing measured, but inside I felt the tension building like a wire pulled taut. The client audit wasn't a dress rehearsal. It was a legally binding review, and penalties were not optional. $250,000 per day of failure, compounding like a silent storm. I imagined Marcus polishing his rehearsed smile while the first cracks spread beneath him, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. 6 days. That was all that separated his false confidence from exposure. The auditors wouldn't be impressed by slogans, and automation scripts wouldn't save him when signatures failed to validate. I closed my laptop softly that evening, the glow fading into darkness, and allowed myself the smallest exhale. They believed they had sidelined me, reduced me to silence, but the system had already begun to whisper. Every unchecked discrepancy, every missing attachment, every falsified reconciliation was another domino lined neatly on the table. The countdown wasn't measured in hours or days anymore. It was measured in details, and I knew with absolute certainty that one detail, just one, would be enough to send Marcus Denton's entire performance crashing down in front of everyone he sought to impress. Friday morning arrived with the sterile calm only a corporate boardroom can produce, polished wood gleaming under recessed lights, the faint hum of projectors filling the silence between forced smiles. Marcus Denton stood tall at the head of the table, blazer pressed to perfection, hair sculpted into confidence he hadn't earned. He launched into his opening remarks for the Fortune 500 compliance review with the swagger of a man convinced slides could replace safeguards. The auditors filed in, stern, professional, notebooks open, eyes sharp. To Marcus, they were just another audience. To me, they were the executioners holding Crestfield Advisory Group's fate in their pens. I sat as observer, a title meant to render me harmless, tucked at the far end with my laptop tilted just enough to watch the truth unravel. The first checkpoint hit the screen: financial reconciliations. Marcus beamed, announcing flawless accuracy, efficiency gains, lean oversight. For a heartbeat, the numbers shone green. Then a subtle flicker. An entry flagged, recalculation error, unresolved. My screen flashed the discrepancy. Marcus didn't notice, or maybe he did, and chose to steamroll it with rhetoric. The auditor's pen scratched across paper. A second checkpoint arrived. Vendor disclosures. Marcus gestured broadly, praising automation tools for cutting turnaround time in half. His voice carried the rhythm of a pitch deck, not a compliance review. But the system log told another story. 2 disclosures were incomplete, attachments missing, validation skipped. My read-only access displayed them in glaring red. Marcus's dashboard showed green, rigged by shortcuts he'd forced through. The auditor leaned closer, frowning. The air shifted, subtle but heavy. Then the governance approvals rolled up. Marcus smiled too wide, promising streamlined sign-offs and eliminated redundancies. What he didn't realize was that redundancy is the spine of compliance. The system stuttered, lagging before freezing mid-sequence. A message appeared across my monitor. Authorization chain invalid. My pulse slowed, steady as I watched the dominoes fall. The penalty clock engaged, bold letters scrolling across the auditor's screen. Non-compliance detected. Daily penalty initiated, $250,000. Gasps escaped around the table. The CFO's face drained of color, the CEO's hands twitched against his chair. Marcus coughed, forced a laugh, waved it away as a handshake timeout. He ordered a junior analyst to override. The analyst's fingers flew across keys before stopping cold. The override was locked. Of course it was. I had seen to that weeks earlier when Marcus revoked my authority without reassignment. The compliance key was bound to me, and no patch could pretend otherwise. The penalty timer ticked on, indifferent to excuses. Day 1, $250,000. Day 2 projected, $500,000. Within minutes, the theoretical losses climbed toward 7 figures. The boardroom. Heat rose through the air conditioning, hummed steady. The auditors whispered among themselves, flipping through binders, their pens carving deeper lines with each failure. Marcus's veneer cracked. His voice rose an octave, sweat forming at his temples. He barked orders, demanded fresh data, tried to smile while his hands trembled on the table. His charm, so carefully practiced, collapsed under the weight of numbers he couldn't manipulate. I sat still, silent, letting the system speak in my stead. It was merciless, impartial. Every skipped safeguard logged, every missing validation exposed. What Marcus had dismissed as clutter was now a chain of evidence documenting his incompetence in real time. Another checkpoint failed. Penalties soared past $1 million. The CFO whispered furiously into her phone. The CEO stared straight ahead as though sheer will could halt the timer. No one looked at me, not yet. I was invisible until the receipts demanded otherwise. Marcus's last attempt at control came when he slammed his palm on the table and declared, "We're still compliant." "These are technical glitches," his voice cracked on the word glitches. The lead auditor looked up slowly, eyes cold, and replied, "Glitches don't trigger federal penalty clauses, Mr. Denton." The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst. My hands rested steady on my keyboard, watching the collapse unfold exactly as I had predicted. The arrogance, the shortcuts, the hollow slides, all of it converged into the one moment Marcus Denton had never prepared for: accountability. And as the penalty clock pushed past $1,200,000, the board finally turned their eyes toward me, the woman they had allowed him to humiliate, the failsafe they thought expendable, realizing too late that the empire Marcus built on efficiency had already cracked beyond repair. The boardroom smelled of panic now, a metallic tang that no amount of polished mahogany could disguise. The penalty clock glared from the auditor's display. $1,250,000 and climbing, each digit a blade carving through Crestfield Advisory Group's reputation. Marcus Denton's voice wavered as he leaned into the microphone, insisting that everything was under control, but his tone betrayed him. The auditors didn't even glance at him anymore. Their focus had shifted to the documents, the signatures, the missing validations that formed a paper trail of negligence. Then the inevitable question came from the lead auditor, voice clipped and merciless. Who revoked the original compliance authority? Silence gripped the room. Marcus stammered, eyes darting to the CEO for rescue, but none came. The CEO's lips pressed into a grim line, the CFO's pen tapped nervously against the table. I opened my laptop, calm as ice, and projected a file onto the shared screen. Revocation log. Crestfield Advisory Group. Marcus Denton. Dated. Time-stamped. Signed electronically. The evidence was undeniable. Murmurs rippled across the table. Marcus's face drained, his practiced smile vanishing as if erased. That was a routine adjustment, he sputtered, but the log scrolled on, showing no reassignment, no board authorization, no dual signature as required by the $22 million audit contract. The lead auditor's gaze was steady. Without dual authorization, the revocation is invalid, which means the system is running non-compliant under your directive. The room froze. Marcus looked at me then, truly looked, desperation clawing at his features. Virginia, he said, voice breaking, you can fix this. Just help us resolve it. The irony of that plea settled heavy in the room. Minutes ago, I had been deadweight compliance. Now I was the only person who could halt the hemorrhage. I let the silence stretch, deliberate, each tick of the penalty clock amplifying his disgrace. Then I spoke evenly, voice carrying no triumph, only fact. The contract binds certification to the original architect unless reassigned with dual authorization. That never happened. The only valid key is mine. You revoked it illegally. A board member, a woman with steel in her eyes, turned to Marcus. Is this true? He faltered, hands trembling before finally nodding. The chairman's voice cut through the chaos, calm and lethal. Then we reinstate Virginia Hale immediately. Papers shuffled, legal counsel whispered, and within minutes a vote was called. The result was unanimous, except for Marcus, whose abstention only sealed his isolation. My screen blinked as the system restored my credential authority. In an instant, the override panel reappeared, glowing like a signal flare in a storm. The penalty clock ticked $1,300,000 as I entered my credentials. With 10 keystrokes and a confirmation press, the rollback sequence engaged. One by one, the red flags dissolved into amber, then green. The auditor's pen slowed, their brows unfurrowed, the weight of penalties halting at last. Relief rippled across the boardroom, but it was not universal. Marcus slumped into his chair, sweat soaking his collar, eyes glassy with disbelief. The chairman didn't wait. He gestured, and 2 security staff appeared at the door. Marcus Denton, you are relieved of duty pending full investigation into compliance violations and dereliction of responsibility. Gasps whispered through the room as Marcus rose shakily, trying to muster dignity, but his voice cracked into nothing. He looked at me one last time, eyes pleading, but I met his gaze without flinching. Audits never forget, Marcus, I said quietly. And the receipts always surface. The guards escorted him out, his polished shoes echoing down the corridor like a retreat drum. In that silence, I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was the failsafe, the authority they had dismissed, restored not by vengeance but by inevitability. The collapse had chosen its casualty, and Marcus Denton was finished. The moment Marcus Denton's footsteps faded beyond the boardroom doors, the air shifted. Relief mingled with unease, the kind that follows a storm but leaves debris scattered in its wake. The auditors sat straighter now, pens poised to capture what came next. The chairman turned toward me, his expression no longer dismissive but weighted with recognition. Virginia, he said, measured and deliberate, you have full control. Report directly to us. No applause, no celebration, just authority restored with the gravity it always carried. I didn't waste time. My fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, revalidating checkpoints, restoring reconciliation chains, documenting each corrective action with precision. Vendor disclosures synced, governance approvals recertified, reconciliations cleared. Each green light that blinked across the screen wasn't a victory for me. It was survival for Crestfield Advisory Group. The CFO leaned forward, eyes wide with something that looked almost like gratitude. The CEO remained silent, pen pressed tight against his knuckles, unwilling to admit how close they had come to disaster. I kept my face neutral, my voice even as I narrated the restoration steps for the audit record. The penalty clock froze at $1,300,000, a wound deep enough to scar, but not fatal. The auditors confirmed compliance reestablished, certification valid, contract salvaged. The board exhaled in collective relief. My new title was read into the record: Executive Compliance Custodian. Direct reporting line to the board, permanent remote authority. It sounded sterile, bureaucratic, but beneath the formality was an undeniable truth. They could never erase me again. As I closed the final log, I understood this wasn't a triumph. It was maintenance. Systems don't run on applause. They run on integrity. And I had just proven, in front of every executive who once dismissed me, that integrity isn't optional. It is survival. When the boardroom finally emptied, I remained seated, the glow of the compliance dashboard reflecting across my screen. The system was stable again, reconciliations aligned, certification secure. Crestfield Advisory Group had avoided a collapse that would have bled millions and destroyed its reputation. But the silence that lingered told its own truth. This company had been saved not by efficiency slogans or cost-cutting theatrics, but by the very safeguards Marcus Denton had mocked as clutter. I opened a fresh document drafting the post-mortem. Not for the executives who would skim the highlights, but for the auditors and legal counsel who would read every line. I documented each failure, every shortcut, every unauthorized revocation. The evidence was complete, undeniable, time-stamped in ways no excuse could erase. As I typed, I thought of Marcus, escorted out with his head down, the echo of his polished shoes already fading into irrelevance. He had tried to build a reputation on optics, on speed, on hollow promises. But compliance isn't theater, it's law, and law leaves receipts. My new title, Executive Compliance Custodian, sat at the top of the reinstatement memo in my inbox. I saved it without ceremony. Authority wasn't about power, it was about accountability. About making sure that when arrogance cut corners, there was someone left to hold the line. I leaned back, hands folded, and let the quiet fill the room. No applause, no vindication. Just the reality that systems survive because someone refuses to look away when the cracks begin to spread. Marcus Denton's downfall wasn't my victory. It was the system's. And as I closed the final log, I whispered the truth I had always known. Audits never forget. The receipts always surface. I didn't walk away from Marcus Denton's downfall with a sense of triumph. What I carried was clarity. His arrogance wasn't just personal, it was systemic. When leaders at Crestfield Advisory Group dismissed compliance as clutter, they revealed how fragile their empire truly was. The $22 million contract wasn't undone by a dramatic betrayal. It cracked because the safeguards they ignored were never optional. Systems don't fail all at once. They erode when warnings are brushed aside, when protocols are cut for optics, when arrogance mistakes paperwork for decoration. That was the flaw Marcus never saw. He thought he could erase me, revoke my authority, and the company would continue as if nothing had changed. But every corner he cut was a countdown. Every skipped validation was another domino. When the audit came, those choices surfaced, and no amount of charisma could hide the receipts. The lesson isn't about revenge. It's about inevitability. Power built on shortcuts cannot last. The wrongdoer faces exposure not because someone fights back with noise, but because systems always reveal their weak points. Marcus's career collapsed in the very room where he tried to humiliate me. I wasn't victorious. I was steady. And that steadiness is what preserved the system when arrogance threatened to destroy it. How to get started today. 1. Document everything. Emails, approvals, risks. Receipts are protection. 2. Read contracts and policies deeply. The details everyone ignores often hold the most power. 3. When arrogance dismisses your warnings, stay calm and prepare quietly. Systems eventually surface the truth. 4. Never confuse silence with weakness. Silence can be preparation. Revenge isn't a strike, it's exposure. Comment your worst office betrayal. Share this story if it resonates. And subscribe for more truths arrogance doesn't want told.